Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today, we are going to be going over team previews for every team in the AFC North. If you haven't already seen, we've done team previews for the AFC and NFC East. We'll be doing them for every division, every single team. We've kind of gone into the draft and free agency in separate kind of areas in our discussion in the previous videos. Today, what we're going to do is just kind of set our narrative for each team and then let the draft and free agency talk kind of, include itself in that naturally. So with the Baltimore Ravens, the main narrative we have for them is, can the Ravens get over the hump this year? They added Derrick Henry. They re-signed Justin Madubuike. They lose OBJ, depending on how you feel about him in a receiver spot. The main overhaul is going to be the offensive line due to the fact that they're really only keeping Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley. It's Stanley, right? Not Staley. I always screw that up for some reason.
No, you know what's funny is I'm on the exact same boat and I do the exact same thing. And you know what? Let's just settle it once and for all, bro. I always say the same thing. It's Stanley, and I always say Staley too for whatever reason. So I owe Ronnie a little bit of an apology. You know what? We finally have it set in stone, though.
I mean, year two of this offense, which honestly I feel like they picked it up pretty quickly last year. I think my biggest thing is the fact that the O-line is going to be different, and kind of the conversation that we've talked about in the past with the Ravens of not having those weapons for Lamar. I know Mark Andrews is there. You have Zay Flowers in year two, but I just don't know how strong I feel about this receiving core. Obviously, you add Derrick Henry. I think the Ravens can get over the hump, but to me, they're one of those teams where it's like, I need to see them do it because they've been very good for a very long time, and they haven't gotten to the Super Bowl yet.
Well, okay. I want to start this with a point that I feel like I've never even really connected the dots on this, but I need to, because this is something I think we all need to consider. What makes Lamar's story so interesting to this point, and so this is not only with the Ravens, but we even go back to the Louisville days. The reality of the situation here, Hunter, that I've come to is Lamar has really never had a great cast on offense surrounding him, even back to college. And we saw how it was in college with the man putting up pure video game numbers, literally playing video game football. So it's funny because you sit here and I'm sure you say, and yes, that's probably what the Ravens front office is saying as well, is they're like, well, you know what? Look, Lamar is such an electric guy. He's such a weapon. We can invest those assets into other areas, make sure we have really good trenches across the board, make sure we have everything else filled, and the receiving core can kind of just do its thing. But it's funny because we always talk about with the modern NFL, right? We're shifting more towards an area where you want to have at least one alpha dog, right? Like, it doesn't have to be, as I always preach, you definitely don't need a whole room of, a whole loaded receiving room. It's a nice luxury to have. But when it comes to paying them and stuff, sometimes it can be a hindrance. But not having the alpha guy is a big deal. Like, you want to at least have a guy that you're very confident throwing to on those third and longs, right? Third and short, big situations where the guy has got to make the catch. You want to have that guy. That's what the Ravens haven't had really Lamar's entire tenure. And it's what he's never even had at Louisville. He's really never had an absolute alpha dominant threat on offense alongside him. And yet he still makes it work. And again, has it worked for the Ravens up to this point? Relatively. Yeah, it works pretty well. But they haven't gotten over the hump. And I think if we go on another year of the Ravens having a fantastic regular season, getting super close, and not being able to get over the hump because we're not having playmakers make plays in the big games when it matters most, I think, it hits a point we talked about before. You got to hit the drawing point or the drawing board at some point if you're the Ravens front office and say, look, we can sacrifice a position or two that we're paying here to get Lamar his alpha guy. Because at this point, you got to be saying to yourself, if Lamar has an alpha guy or even two alpha guys on this offense, and he's already doing what he's doing without them, how much more electric can things be if we just push that a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball? That's kind of where I'm starting to become, where my argument's coming from as a fan of the NFL at this point. Because again, we see it's not that Lamar can literally be the MVP without having an alpha. Let us see what Lamar can do with an alpha on that same offense as him.
And I think, a lot of the discussion about Lamar as a running back has kind of died. Like, rightfully so, if you look at it, because we saw Lamar win from the pocket last year. Lamar is a very, very good passer. He's not, a lot of people would equate, they tried to equate Justin Fields to Lamar, but they're different players, far different players. Lamar is much more effective as a passer. And ever since Lamar has come onto the Baltimore Ravens team, they have been a winning team. I think they've only had 1 year with a losing record, and that was 8-9, so damn near 500 without the extra game. And since Lamar Jackson has played in the NFL, he has led the team in passing and rushing every single year. So we can talk about an alpha, but let's talk about a run game that doesn't even exist outside of him. J.K. Dobbins has been hurt. Gus Edwards has been good. Like they've been a good rushing team, but take away Lamar's rushes, and they're probably not that good of a rushing team. I mean, obviously Gus Edwards came in, he did his job getting the touchdowns and everything like that, but I think they banked a lot on J.K. Dobbins, and I honestly think that because the Ravens did not go out and get a solidified wide receiver 2, which you could argue, Flowers is the wide receiver 2 and Andrews is the wide receiver 1 just because of how talented he is. I think they realized that like getting a dominant back in a Derrick Henry is going to force the defense to really respect the run a lot more. And now, we saw what Lamar can do from the pocket last year. I think with Henry added, I think it does give the Ravens a kind of edge that they haven't had before. And a big thing for me, Dobbs, is this is probably, would you argue, the best cast that Lamar has had on offense? I mean, now that I can think about it, outside of the offensive line, and I know we're really harping on Lamar and his weapons right now, but we know what the Ravens' defense is. Like, I'm not concerned about the defense in the slightest. It's really going to be up to the offense if they can take that next step forward in the Todd Monken offense year 2.
Well, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you say that, because that's the thing, Hunters. Let it be clear. We're not taking anything away from the Ravens defense. That's the reality, is the Ravens defense is one of the best, if not the best in the league, where you have every position filled out. And so it's like, again, to the point of, and that's why it makes it even more frustrating with what's going on the offensive side is, again, we'll use the Chiefs as the example last year. Let's be realistic here. If the Ravens win that game, there's a very good chance that they are the Super Bowl champions. And we're talking about the Ravens as Super Bowl champions. And to the point, the Ravens had played fantastic defense in that game against the Chiefs. What was the reason they didn't win the game? Lack of offensive playmaking. Matter of fact, I'll even go a little step further, that it was terrible offensive playmaking, like crucial turnovers that can't be happening from offensive playmakers, right? So when we hit this point where you're saying to yourself, legitimately, you can say if we just had one or two other guys that were making plays for us, we are probably Super Bowl champions. That hurts to look back on in retrospect. And then you have a whole nother offseason to right that wrong. And yes, you could argue to me that Derrick Henry is the one that's righting that wrong. But again, from our perspective, Hunter, we've seen the story 1,000 times. He could come in and be super productive like he's been, and he's King Henry. And I'll never doubt King Henry again, per se. But again, this is not doubt. It's just reality. He is getting older. And you never know when we are going to see that massive drop off in production. You just never know. And if it's this year and that's where you spent the money, we're basically back to square one again, where because and here's the thing, too. This is what really, really corrodes the whole thing, is that when you have a good defense that understands that all you have and where everybody's on board with a great defensive coordinator and they've made it as far and you're facing them in the playoffs and everybody's playing good ball in the freezing cold. And the game plan is just to basically eliminate Lamar from the game plan. And we're saying to ourselves, we know Lamar will beat us if we let him. We're not going to let Lamar do anything. Let's let everybody else make plays and beat us. And we know that they aren't going to be able to. That's quite literally where other teams are at with the Ravens right now. So you can take Lamar out the game because he's the only person you have to take out of the game on offense pretty much at this point. So if the Ravens can't fix that this year, the bottom line is it'll probably be a repeat of every other year recently. A very good team, but a team that can't get over the hump, which is why our narrative, we've been saying, Hunter, is that this defense is amazing. The offense, though, minus Lamar, is the question. And the question is, can this offense get this team over the hump? That is yet to be determined.
I think one thing that does go in the Ravens' favor is Derrick Henry necessarily wasn't playing again behind like the best offensive line. So if you want to look at, the Ravens' O-line isn't that good, like Henry, it doesn't really matter in terms of what Henry is. I think every once in a while we get a player who, obviously, Father Time is undefeated, but Henry can still be effective for what he is. And if Keaton Mitchell comes back, that thunder and lightning punch will be really effective because Keaton Mitchell lit it up last year before I think he tore his ACL. But before we move on to our next team in the AFC North, do you have any closing thoughts on the Ravens?
It's not even really a closing thought. It's just one more thought that I wanted to offer up that I think it complements so well everything we've been saying, where the Ravens sometimes are a little bit too maybe they have too much belief in the guys they already have in house, which is what leads to the problem. Because I don't know, did you see that quote from John Harbaugh recently, where they asked him about Rashad
Rashad
Bateman's
Bateman,
expectations
yeah.
for the season, and he said,
Give it up, man. He's cooked. Give it up.
basically verbatim, except I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Like, well, we expect Rashad to be one of the best guys in the entire league, and that's that. Look, coach, I really do respect the optimism and I appreciate the lifting your guys up. But there has to be a point where we look at things objectively and we say, how often do we see a guy coming in to basically contract year, needing to make a jump from being a bottom tier receiver to a top tier receiver? It just sounds really, really unrealistic. And on top of that, it also sounds like maybe we're managing assets a little bit poorly, because we got to say to ourselves at some point, we got to make an upgrade. You know what I'm saying here, Hunter? That's just kind of final thoughts. That's really where I think the Ravens have got to make an evolution here.
I think they have been quite stingy at the wide receiver position, unfortunately. I think the fact that they were able to get a first for Hollywood Brown was kind of crazy. And I think my thing is this. Like, I like the idea of taking Nate Wiggins with the 30th pick. But doesn't it kind of feel like the Ravens have only really brought in one type of receiver? Like small, speedy guys?
Minus Rashad, but Rashad didn't work out, so it doesn't even
that's
matter.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't feel like they draft super well at receiver or like bring in the right guys personally. But
no, I'm with you on that. And again, because Devontae Walker does fit very much into that mold. I am still going to give him a shot because his ability to get off the press, and he has some traits that I am a big fan of. But again, we still have got to see about that. Those hands have got to make a heavy transition. There's a lot of things that have got to make a transition, including Roger Rosengartner, who's going to be a huge. If Roger Rosengartner doesn't pan out, that was it, right? That's an expensive pick where he's kind of, and I don't want to say an experiment, but super high upside. We definitely got a lower, right? There's a lower than a lot of other tackles. I'd say that in the easiest way of saying it, the Ravens potentially had an absolutely amazing draft class, but there's definitely volatility where if some of these guys end up at their floor, well, we say, all right, we hit about 50-50 in our first 4 picks. And all of a sudden, again, your roster is really good, so you're in range where that's possible, and it's not like it's even a big deal if some of these guys don't pan out. But specifically with Devontae's, you want to see Devontae's turn into an actual guy on this roster, because it really just hasn't happened for so long with any of these draft picks, minus Zay Flowers. But back to the truth about Zay, and again, as much as I love Zay in the slot, I don't know if you can consider Zay alpha dog, at least not yet. So again, as far as the Ravens offense goes, more questions than answers so far. And this season is going to be where we get our answers.
Moving in to the Cincinnati Bengals, our narrative is, can Burrow stay healthy to make a deep run? Unfortunately, Joe Burrow has not been able to stay healthy throughout his NFL career. He's played 16 games twice, and then the other years he's played 10. Obviously, we saw what they did with Jake Browning last year, which was pretty impressive, and I think that goes out to Zach Taylor, who has been a pretty good coach for what he's had. And I know, people were kind of on him before he got Burrow, but at the end of the day, what they did was Jake Browning was impressive. Now they go out, they go get Amarius Mims in the draft, who is one of the most athletic freaks at tackle you'll see. One of the biggest athletic freaks at tackle you'll see. You have Trent Brown at one tackle and Orlando Brown at the other tackle, so just massive guys to protect Joe Burrow. Obviously, the T. Higgins situation is overshadowing this team, but they did go out and get Jermaine Burton, I believe, in the 3rd round. And Jermaine Burton fell because of character issues. He did not fall because of talent issues. I really think the Bengals got a steal here because of what Jermaine Burton can be if they let T. Higgins walk. I also think Eric All, the tight end they drafted from Iowa, I know he was a transfer to Iowa and he wasn't, this full-time guy there, but we know what Iowa has done with their tight ends. I really like the idea of bringing in Zach Moss. I don't know if he's going to 1-for-1 replace Joe Mixon, but overall, I think the Bengals are in a good spot. They also lost DJ Reader, so that is a little bit tough to replace, but I think the thing with the Bengals has been their slow starts. Like, I really do think their slow starts are what hinder them a lot, and obviously the injuries to Joe Burrow. I mean, personally, I think any year that Burrow is healthy, they have a chance because they're just a team that finds a way to get hot at the end of the year and fights. So I think if Joe Burrow can stay healthy, I don't know how I feel about the new hair, but did you see the new hair?
Yeah,
Looks like
confused.
yeah, a little interesting. But I mean, I don't hate it, but
No, I definitely don't hate it. Just confused a little bit, but
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Daz? Like, I think they're as good as anybody in the AFC outside of the Chiefs to go ahead and try to win the Super Bowl.
no, absolutely. And that's actually what makes the Bengals so polarizing right now. Is they're kind of in this weird limbo state of like, that's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying. They're it's kind of like what are those things they call it? Like with the weights where they balance on one. Like on one side of it, it's like if things go perfectly, this team for sure, if all the problems get erased and taken off the right this side, we can go all the way. The Super Bowl is for sure peak possible for this team. It's definitely a roster still built that they can win the Super Bowl. But on the bottom side of things, if we pile on a Joe Burrow injury over here and another season, because and that's the biggest thing. It really comes down to like if Joe Burrow has another season-ending injury or even just a lingering injury, we are quickly approaching like very troubling territory, and that
especially after the extension, yeah.
Like let me be clear. This is I'm a Joe Burrow fan, man. I'm an LSU fan. Like that was my absolute fucking boy for a whole season, like 2 seasons. It's my fucking boy. But the thing is this. The reality is we're hitting is if you get again, I don't want to make the comparison because it's getting too easy, it's getting too generic. But we saw with Andrew Luck how quickly you can go from being on top of the league to like, especially when you really care about the future of what you have going on. As someone like Joe Burrow, definitely I don't think is just linear, like only on the next 10, 15 years of his life. You think about it long term and you start to say to yourself, okay, there's a lot of things I want to do in my life besides just play football until I'm 35 or 40 and then just live out the rest of my days, in pain. If that was, and I'm not saying everyone's going to, but I'm saying if you're Joe Burrow and you keep piling up injuries, there's going to hit a point mentally, as he's already talked about, where you can only do it for so long when you're just getting crushed. So to bring it all together, there is so much pressure on this O-line this year to get it right because they haven't gotten it right. And it's been affecting the team from a standpoint of they would have been able to compete for the Lombardi every single year if Joe Burrow was just healthy. We've already seen that firsthand. Now it's just a matter of like, can you guys actually keep him upright for more than a whole season? And that truly is just the narrative at this point. Everything else we've already said is true. Yes, the defense has holes. It's far from perfect. But I'd even kind of compare the Burrow. When Burrow's out there, it's not the same level. But I'd say it's very similar to Mahomes to that extent of like, look, we always got a shot if Joey B's out there, Like it doesn't really matter what the defense is doing. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. It's like Joe Burrow's going to find that open man and make that play. Right. It doesn't really matter. So if we can just keep him out there, that's the story of the season. Holes on defense, holes on offense. It's not the end of the world because you have Joe Burrow. Can you finally just keep him healthy? And you know what? To the point you made, they certainly tried as far as free agency goes, as far as the draft goes. It was definitely the focus of the offseason, which you have to appreciate if you're a Bengals fan, but it doesn't always translate to immediate results. So really, if you're a Bengals fan, you just really got to hope Trent Brown and Amarius Mims are the guys that are going to be able to hold it down at this point going forward. And again, Trent Brown might just be this year, but you better at least be able to hold, Trent can hold it down this year till Amarius comes in.
Well, I'm also interested to see what goes on with the Trey Hendrickson situation because I believe he's asking for a trade or for his contract to be adjusted. But if I'm not mistaken, didn't he get a contract extension like very recently?
No, yeah, I believe, and I think it's just because the market, how they get these guys get when they sit down with their agents. The agent says, "Hold on a minute, we can make some more money." That's the only option. We're not making more money. We're going to sit down and we're going to make more money. So like, I think that's exactly what happened. And, I'm looking for a little update here to see if I can find like an update for us, but unfortunately it really doesn't look.
I haven't heard anything on the Trey Hendrickson,
of an update other than the fact that at least at this point, we're leaning towards that Trey will probably end up being a Bengal this year.
Oh, I think so too. If anything, it's the trade deadline. I don't think we see anything before that.
Yeah, definitely not.
Well, moving in to our next team in the AFC North, we have the Cleveland Browns. And I think the narrative is pretty simple. Will Deshaun make the jump that is needed? We know how talented this Cleveland Browns team is, but Deshaun Watson has played just 12 games in 2 years since coming back and being the Cleveland quarterback. and he hasn't thrown for more than 1,100 yards in either year. Obviously, limited games, but with that being said, Joe Flacco took them pretty far last year for what was expected of them, going through 4 quarterbacks. The Cleveland Browns gave up a 2022 first, a 2022 fourth, a 2023 first, a 2023 third, a 2024 first, and a 2024 fourth for Deshaun Watson, who has played 12 games. We know this defense is ready to win. We saw the front office go out. They traded for Jerry Jeudy. They extended him. They gave a boost to Amari Cooper's contract. Njoku balled out with Flacco. So we know he's got it in him. I wonder if we see the same effect with Watson. I just don't know. I mean, obviously you look at the Browns line, and they look really good, offensive and defensive. But if that quarterback position can't put it together, that'll be the death of this team.
No, yeah. Well, and again, it's not even like there's no surprise to anybody about the Browns. Like, the Browns are about as straightforward of a narrative as we can get at this point. And Browns fans know best. That's what's funny is really there's not even any discrepancy about this narrative. This is one that nobody would disagree with as long as you spent any time watching the NFL recently. Because we'll go back here, Hunter, and, little time travel here. I think we could agree. I'll tell you, look, you see the logo on my hat here, as a Saints fan, I remember very clearly that when the Browns and the Saints were the last 2 teams in the running, look, I'm an honest guy. I was on the whole train of like, oh, come on, like, let's get this done and let's turn Nola back around. And if we get Deshaun in the building, it's not back to Drew, but like, golly, we're damn close at that point because of what I thought Deshaun was going to come back and do. Because if we look, remember again, maybe some of these youngins, are a little quick to forget, Hunter, but Deshaun Watson was absolutely lighting it up before all the bad stuff had come up, to put it
4,800 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions in his last year.
And he looked fantastic. It wasn't just the numbers. It was like he was really playing elite ball, like his pocket awareness, his ability outside the pocket, the arm angles. Like, Deshaun Watson truly looked like he was on like I don't say this lightly. He looked like he was on Hall of Fame trajectory. Like he was going to be a quarterback that was going to have a very storied career, especially when we consider what he already did at Clemson, right? Like, Deshaun Watson is, like it or not, a storied football player already in his own right. I mean, right? Like, if we put it in perspective. So what I'm really trying to say is when the trade was happening, right, obviously all the things going on with him outside of football were very real and was something that everybody was paying attention to. But as far as the talent goes, right, a lot of people expected he was going to come back and be able to light it up, and that stuff wasn't going to affect how he played and the time off wasn't going to affect. Well, as we can see, right, that's not exactly what's happened. And it hasn't been even close to old Deshaun from a mental standpoint, but much more so from a physical standpoint. So all of a sudden we're in a situation where you're saying to yourself, if you're the Browns, the one guy that we were basically certain was going to be the reason we could make a Lombardi run is all of a sudden the very guy that seems to be holding this roster back from making a Lombardi run. How ironic and how quickly things turn around in this league. But it's the bottom line, right, Hunter, is that if he doesn't make a jump this year, all of the sudden, we're going to look back on that, if we're not already, and saying it was the worst trade in the history of football. So there's a lot of pressure on the Browns, but not just the Browns. There's a lot of pressure on, I said things you can't even really say there's pressure on Deshaun. That's where it gets funny, is because really what pressure? What pressure is there on Deshaun?
There's none. There is pressure, but there's not, because when you look at the contract, it was unprecedented. And you remember when the trade was going down, I could be remembering wrong, but tell me if I'm wrong, Dobbs. Weren't the Browns out of the running at some point? And then I think they came back with the fully guaranteed contract and they got back in.
That's actually what makes it so interesting, is that I really do believe the Saints were like that close. But that's when the Browns were like, okay. And I don't blame the Browns. I totally get it. From the optics of the Browns, you're thinking to yourself, if all we really need is the elite quarterback and we're getting prime Deshaun Watson, run it out, like, give him that guaranteed money. We are the franchise of all franchises, us and the Lions, right, that have to do something finally, that has to finally make a push. Our fans are literally desperate drooling for some type of success. So I get it from the optics of why the Browns would have done it. But it's like, we're looking at it now, Hunter, and this might have been the biggest mistake in modern sports history.
Another thing we got to think about, Dobbs, is Nick Chubb was a big part of this team. And he had a gruesome knee injury. Like, I don't doubt that he can come back from it. I saw him squatting 800 pounds already somehow. But it's like, Chubb wasn't the youngest. That was a bad injury. So what if Chubb isn't back? I mean, Jerome Ford, okay. Deonta Foreman, okay. Like, I think Foreman is a lot better than people give him credit for. But I don't know, man. Like, if you don't have that run game, and kind of going back on what we were talking about with Watson, like, they were 5-1 with him starting quarterback as a starting quarterback last year. But he didn't look good. Like, he did not look fluid. And I really think taking a year off from football and coming back is probably one of the hardest things you can do. And I don't know if he's ever going to get back up to speed. I feel like it's such a momentum thing.
Well, I think, and at this point, you're spot on. I agree 100%. Hunter. I think the big thing too is what's really killing him is it's the year off on top of the fact that he is just truly not as healthy as he used to be. Like, I think a lot of people are downplaying like
the shoulder.
Because we know, look, the reality is this: we've seen this so long, and a lot of fans don't really consider. I don't think. Like, I think they think of it kind of like, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. Just how a lot of fans think of it. Like, they think of football injuries too much like it's like Madden or some shit.
Yeah.
Like, oh, dude, his time's up. Like, he's healthy again. What do you mean? Like, the injury report said he's healthy. It's like, dude, these are legitimately
human beings.
Catastrophic injuries compared to what, like, when you hit our shoulder on, right? I'll use like a normal example. We slam our shoulder into the fridge. That shit's going to hurt for a few days, right? Now imagine getting slammed by a fridge, right, by somebody slamming you with the fridge and having it happen multiple times every day. And then it's not healing and it's not getting better and you're getting older. Like, that's the reality of how these injuries are occurring. It's not just this, he's healthy again, guys. Like, yeah, he might be healthy enough to get back on the field, but we're seeing that this is not just some injury to injury type of stuff. This is very clearly a lingering, I don't want to say arthritic because I'm sure that I'm wrong on that, but it's definitely, it's a lingering pain, right? Like, this is not just something that's just coming and going. The shoulder thing has been, it's kind of like a timeline at this point. And that's another big narrative this year. Is the shoulder stuff finally over? Or is it going to be just a continuum? Because we've seen,
I'll say
this
goes
every year, Hunter. He's over it. The coaches are all telling you it's in the rear view. It's water under the bridge. Week 3 or 4, the same injury is knocking at that door again. And I don't mean to be negative. I've just seen this shit so many times that I'm just going to look at it.
We saw it a lot with Cam, right? Like,
we see it with so many guys at this point. Like,
Cam, once he had that big shoulder injury, it was like he was never the same guy. He really wasn't. And unfortunately, quarterbacks need their shoulders to throw the ball. So I think it's going to be a very telling year. I think like this is the year where they're going to know if Deshaun is going to be their guy for the foreseeable future or they need to pivot, because it would be really bad if they like doubled down on Deshaun just because of the trade, because you have a Super Bowl ready roster and you don't want to waste that.
Absolutely. No, that is the sticky situation that the Cleveland Browns have put themselves in now here.
Moving in to our last team in the AFC North, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Our narrative for the year is, do you have your future quarterback? You bring in Russ on a dirt cheap contract. You trade for Justin Fields, who is a young quarterback who was put not in a great position, but also I feel like didn't help himself enough to prove that he was worth keeping around. And, you know, I think, Dobbs, and tell me if I'm wrong, that the NFL and NFL fans have kind of lauded or lauded's good, right? Or am I just using big?
You know what? Little English check here. Wait, hold on. Yeah, highly praised or admired. Yeah, let's go.
Big vocab mind. Anyway, they've been lauded for bringing in Russ so cheap and Justin for so cheap. Okay, but What if neither of them are the guy going forward? Then you're at square one in a year with a bad quarterback draft. Like, I am not a believer in the Russ train anymore. I far more confident in what Sean Payton can do for an offense than what Arthur Smith can. I do think Arthur Smith will be fine because I think the responsibilities of a head coach are a lot more than just being an OC. And I think when OCs get turned into head coaches because they have good offenses and then they're not good head coaches, I do feel like going back to that OC role can kind of rejuvenate them. And I'm optimistic for what Arthur Smith can do. I think the Steelers had a really good draft class. I didn't mind their free agency, but I don't know if you have either of these guys are the answer at quarterback, because what if Russ is not playing well? And what if they throw in Justin? Well, you can't put Russ back in. Like, in my opinion, how Russ has operated these last couple years, like, he is top dog.
Well, no, absolutely. And I think this is the thing I want to bring up too, because look, as you were just touching on, you're spot on with this. Here's my issue with the whole thing, right? And I think this is where a lot of Steelers fans are getting super optimistic. And again, I'm not going to fault them. They are being objective, but here's my rebuttal to the whole thing. Because you're hearing a lot of fans at this point say, well, look, right, Art Smith, what he did for Ryan Tannehill, why can't he do the same thing for Russell Wilson? But I think what people aren't realizing is that, at least, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion here, Hunter, it's two completely different situations. Ryan Tannehill never developed into anything until Art Smith, basically, let's be realistic, came into his life, right? Like, Ryan Tannehill basically didn't have any of his NFL talent unlocked. And then in the Art Smith system, it really worked. They shined together. They actually had a very, very productive offense, and it was very fun to watch, right? And it was a very good balance of play action, running the ball. But I think the difference we can agree on is that Russ is not Ryan Tannehill. Russ was having a Hall of Fame caliber career up until he started to fall off, get older, deal with some injuries. And now he's just basically not the same quarterback he used to be. So I don't, and not that he still can't be productive, but let's be real. This Russell Wilson is not the old Russell Wilson. It's not like, oh, he just lost it a little bit and we just got to, fix a few things and he's going to be right back to old Russ. It's like, no, I think this is what happens when Russ is getting older. And it's not. So with Ryan Tannehill, it was like we were literally fixing a project that was never brought to fruition. Well, Russ has already been brought to fruition and has been a really, really amazing quarterback. I think we're on the decline, right?
In that sense, though, Dobbs,
like, prop up a decline, right?
You could argue that Justin Fields is more like Tannehill than Russ would be.
And that's where I was going next. You read my mind. Okay. Is that I think in reality, right? Like, we talk about the long-term visions of teams all the time, Hunter. That's the problem. Is that, like you just said, if Russ is getting older and Russ is not the guy and he's on a one-year deal, okay, it's not the end of the world. But if Justin Fields is also not the guy, and even let's just throw out another scenario. Let's say Justin, let's just crazy hypotheticals for a second. But it all can happen. Let's say that Russ has a really bad first half of the season. Okay. You bring Justin in. He looks better than he did last year for the Bears. Should say just good enough. Just good enough that you have to lock him in on a few years of the deal. You got to put cap into him, right? But then he's not the guy that's going to bring you Lombardi land. All of a sudden, we're right back into the same position we've been with for the last 3 or 4 years with the Steelers. Like, we have a really good special teams unit. We have a really good defensive unit. But the offense is just not cutting it. And on top of the offense not cutting it, the QB is just not the guy that's going to carry us to the promised land. Now, let's just go to scenario 3. All 2 of them don't work out. And then we have to go to the draft. Like you just said, as of right now, Carson Beck's the one guy I really have my eye on that I think is going to be a good pro. And again, as the draft process continues, that could completely change. Somebody could completely come and shine. Carson Beck could fall apart. A lot of things could change. But to your point, as of right now, it's a very weak QB class, right? So if Russ and Justin don't work out and you got to move on to the QB class, and all of your star players, as we've talked about with Steelers for so long now, Hunter, as Steelers fans hate us for it, but it's true. You have a core of guys that were the core for so long that are getting old, that are getting to the end of being of playing their best all-pro type of football. So all of a sudden, if Russ or Justin isn't the guy, realistically, we're going to hit a point where the Steelers are going to have to rebuild sooner than later. And it's the painful truth that a lot of Steelers fans never want to like come to with, because Mike Tomlin's such a good coach, because they have such a strong, amazing pedigree that nobody will ever be able to take away from them. But Steelers fans, I think all I'm trying to lay out is the reality that just maybe you might have to kind of swallow a couple seasons coming up to get back to that same Steelers standard. Because as of right now, I think you'd agree, Hunter, things just feel very limbo state.
Yeah, I mean, my main thing is, okay, if you want to see if Russ or Justin are going to be the guys, right? You essentially both have them on one-year deals. You trade away Kenny Pickett. Yeah, I think they put together the line pretty well. When it comes to weapons, though, like, is George Pickens a number one alpha receiver? I guess you could argue that, like, you have Art Smith and, like, he had all these weapons in Atlanta and definitely didn't use them to their potential. So you have, like, a guy like Cordero Patterson and even, like, a Scotty Miller, who I think can be used in a good gadget way. So I think you're in a decent spot on the offense, but it's not like Russ has like a ton of options. It's not like Russ is going to be surrounded by a star-studded cast, and Justin won't either. So I just feel like the best. Okay, this is where I struggle with this too. I guess we have been really heavy on the offense on this one as well, similar to the Browns, but it's like the Browns or the Ravens, but like all these teams have good defenses. I think.
Well, they all have great defenses.
Yeah,
and that's why it's even like
AFC
that's
North, yeah.
like we're addressing the reality is that's kind of why it's the problem with the narrative is the defense doesn't even tie into the narrative at all. Like we know these teams have amazing defenses. I think the offense is the story.
One of the main things that I struggle with is, okay, let's say Russ has a good year. Russell Wilson is 35 years old. What, are you going to extend him for 2-3 years? He's not going to take this team to a Super Bowl. It's just not going to happen. So, at least in my opinion, I don't think this is a Super Bowl ready roster.
It's the slimmest of chances, statistically speaking.
Anything's possible. But, okay, you extend Russ for 3 years. Then what? Like, I understand you want to stay competitive. And I'm not saying rebuild. I'm not saying anything, really. I don't know what they should do. This is almost an impossible position, especially when you've been in the inevitable 10-7, 9-8, over 500 rule for the last however many years under Tomlin. You're not bad enough to break it down, but you're not good enough to get a win. You haven't gotten I don't think they've gotten a playoff win since, 2017?
Well, I was gonna hold on. Just wait one sec here.
The Steelers' last playoff win was, let's see.
Yeah,
2016.
2016.
So it's been a while. Like, I don't know. The Steelers are a very intriguing team, and I think they will always be good under Tomlin. I just think he's one of those guys that elevates the team. But I almost feel like you have to take another swing at quarterback this year. Like, regardless, if Russ gets extended, you have to take a swing at quarterback. And if Justin does, I don't know if Justin is going to. With Justin's agent, I find it very hard to believe he takes like the Daniel Jones contract.
No, and that makes sense too. No, it definitely does. And that's why, like, I'm with you 100% here, Hunter. The problem with the Steelers is truly like they are probably the biggest enigma in terms of like how do you go about getting this team back to the promised land in a couple seasons, right? Like every team we can make a long 5-term, 7-year vision. But with the Steelers, it's like, I don't know what they're going to do to immediately get back to contention. The only thing is if Russ has a full-blown rejuvenation of 6 years ago. But is that likely? It's not.
In the last 5 years, they have only had a positive point differential once. once.
That is crazy.
I think point differential is probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest indicators if you're a good team or not. Like when we were talking about the Ravens and Lamar, they had point differentials where they were like plus 200 by multiple years, and they've been great teams. Where I think in general, like, what year was it when the Steelers started out like 10-0, 11-0, and I was just
I think
like
it was 2021, if I'm not mistaken,
something like that, and I was just like, no, it had to be 2020 because it had to be 2020. But I was just like, this team isn't what it's made out to be. Now, funny enough, that was the year that they had the positive point differential in the last 5. It was 104. But I don't know, just very interesting times in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that, to say the least.
So before we wrap up our AFC North video, do you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts is, you know what? The AFC North is definitely just as much of a bloodbath as it's always been. And it's definitely going to be a fun season again to watch how this division unravels. Because if there's one thing about the AFC North that we can agree on, it's that, you know what? We definitely do not know how this division is going to pan out.
Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been our team preview for every team in the AFC North. If you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments who you think is going to win the AFC North this year, what's your favorite narrative going into the year, and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much for watching.